All right, Matthew, you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Okay, folks, thanks for joining us today. Super excited to have Matthew Balser here. He is a senior solution engineer for SentinelOne in Canada. Matthew spent over a decade consulting customers on building networks, communication platforms, and cybersecurity. Prior to joining SentinelOne to support their innovative endpoint protection, he worked for industry leaders such as Cisco and Kaspersky Labs. He is a passionate evangelist for cybersecurity, and he is a frequent speaker and panel member helping customers understand the threat landscape and measures to defend against it. So again, super excited to have you here today, Matthew, and the floor is yours. Oh, one quick housekeeping. If you do have any questions for Matthew, I will be monitoring the Q&A, so just pop them right in there and I will communicate it over to Matthew. So now, for realsy, the floor is yours, Matthew.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Amanda. And thank you everyone for joining me. As excited as Amanda and the team is to have me, I'm excited to be talking about something I'm passionate about, which is always security and making sure that customers and everybody is as secure and as safe as they can be. So today I really did want to broach for the 1000th time the subject of ransomware. And I think it's important to revive this conversation because I feel like there is a question right now, is ransomware, something that's still very serious, still one of the biggest issues we face in the security world, or has it sort of started to become this underlying thing that maybe isn't the most serious, threat out there? So, is it a dead horse? Is it this surging mechanism of attack? So what are we really dealing with? So, how does ransom work? And the big question is it still really one of the biggest threats out there? And I always come back to this one quote. It got reused by Kaiser Soze in a very famous movie, but it actually links back to an old French writer. And it's the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince you that he doesn't exist. And I think that's sort of what we're living through right now in the world of ransomware. Is hackers are really trying to let this fall off, and they're being very selective of their targets. And even when they do hit their targets, we're sort of not seeing the same news coverage we did in 2016 and 2017, where it seemed like every week there was a big name like Target and somebody else that was making the news for being hit. I think we're seeing a little bit less of that, but it doesn't mean that ransomware has gone away. It means, one, companies are being a little bit more secretive when they do get hit, and furthermore, I think, like I said, that the hackers are being a little bit more selective to their targets so that they're not constantly under the watchful eye of authorities and everything else. But it certainly does not mean that ransomware has gone away. So we see the trend here, and certainly 2020, what a year. Obviously, the big subject, and we're still living through it, is this never-ending pandemic. Of course, there was political turmoil, economic crisis, and this just sets the table for everything we see from an attack perspective in the cyber world. And we can see that with this trend, right? Obviously, 2016 was the big coming out party for ransomware attacks. Over 638 million, attacks. Goes down a lot, or at least we're seeing a lot less reported in 2017, 2018, 2019. And then we see what happens in 2020. And this is 304. And you might look at 2016 versus 2020 and say, well, Matt, that's less than half. And that could be a good thing. Well, yes and no. It's a good thing because it means that, one, we've become more attack aware, and certainly companies have invested more heavily in defense. But that also means that in spite of that, we're still seeing a massive surge. So in spite of an increased investment, in spite of an increased awareness, we saw a surge last year. Part of that is because of instability. Part of that was because, a lot of people had to be very agile in what they did last year in terms of sending employees home, changing the way they work, changing where they access applications and different work resources. So in this massive unrest, it became very easy for, hackers to sort of take advantage. And we see this surge. But to me, what's even maybe more interesting is we didn't just see a surge in the number of attacks from the year before. We saw a surge again in the number of new types of ransomwares we got discovered. So, it doesn't, not a huge jump, but still a jump nonetheless. And what's more, which should be put in context here, is from 2016 to 2018, we were still doing a lot of the discovery of the ransomware families that actually hit in 2016, right? It took a while for the world to catch up and figure out and really do forensics and analysis on the ransomware attacks that hit in 2016, that, again, made all those news, the big headlines. What's impressive here is we discovered a whole bunch more last year. And, things like what we just came out a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago at this point, the whole print nightmare, print scare, whatever you wanted to call it. So I always sort of look at these, and again, I have to take back some perspective and go, well, 127 new families, but think about print nightmare, an exploit that was a vulnerability that dates back 5-10 years in some cases, depending on how you really look at it and how you dig in and, sort of look at how Microsoft has built operating systems over time. So we're discovering new families that are really taking advantage of old exploits, old vulnerabilities here. So, something we really have to pay attention to is this problem is getting worse. Hackers are getting more creative, and they, some of their research that might be 5 to 10 years old in terms of how to exploit a vulnerability on your system is really only coming to fruition now. So, all of that information they share has now brought these new families to light. So again, we're seeing a surge. But I bet you, had I asked you to guess what the most popular family of ransomware code was last year, probably very few of you, and usually, if we had a little bit more of an interactive session or a live session, I hope we can get back to those soon. But I would have asked this question to the audience and thrown out a prize to whoever guessed right, and I've yet to have someone guess this right. So WannaCry, still the #1 piece of ransomware code seen in the wild, hitting customers. So of those 304 million attacks last year, 16 some odd percent of them were WannaCry still. So we still haven't caught up to an attack that is at least 5 years old. We're still playing catch up. People are still mutating. There's been a lot of talk recently, obviously, and I don't want to get political, but there's been a lot of talk recently, right, about this sort of mutation of a virus. Well, WannaCry is just like that, right? We are seeing mutations of it come and come again, and continue to hit systems. It's a very easy to deploy and very successful hit rate type of code. So hackers will just continue to use it. So there was one economy that did not crash last year. And that, of course, is the ransomware economy, right? Pretty big jump in the average ransom paid from 115,000 to 312,000. The largest payment doubled. And actually that 10 million, I think, is someone's research, but I know of ones that certainly had paid out more than 10 million. And, the largest demand going up to 30 million. And, something like the Maze attack, where, the average demand was around 4.8 million, right? And the average paid was across, was right near there, because Maze was very difficult to deal with, which is a huge jump from what we see with the more common strains of ransomware, which is, just under $1 million. But these numbers are drop in the bucket, right? We know of the pipeline attack, right, which made a ton of news, 4.4 million. Now, because this was a government, led response, obviously some of that was recovered. Other organizations have not been so lucky, right? If I look at that, that payment of $10 million, that's drop in the bucket. Cognizant reported a $70 million cost to their board. ISS reported $112 million cost to their board. So whatever they paid, the eventual cost to the organization was significantly more. And I mean, if we look at the cybercrime as a whole, as an industry, which, I think most of the hackers would sort of tell you that that is their job, and so it is an industry. It comes in second to only the drug industry in terms of illegitimate, verticals. With a reported around $20 billion over, globally in terms of the cost to ransomware and cyber attacks last year. So massive number, bigger than a lot of countries' total economies, is that number. And so, again, this is a surge. We can't hide it. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We're definitely seeing not just the number of attacks surge, but the cost to organizations go up exponentially. I don't think a lot of companies could even survive a $70 million cost in a year. What I would refer to as some of the bigger companies. So smaller, medium-sized enterprise organizations might not be able to survive that type of cost. So how does it really work, and why are we so held hostage by this? And how do we keep seeing success? It's because, one, attacks are really complex, but they're very methodical, and they work on steps that are successful time and time again. And also they rely on, the fact that operating system manufacturers, backup manufacturers, technology manufacturers simply can't keep up, because there will always be new research on vulnerabilities that the hackers will take advantage of. And so this is what we see, right? And another big thing to understand is there's many types of ransomware. We're not just dealing with that classic cryptoware that everybody is become familiar with from movies and news articles, where you click on the wrong file, all of a sudden you get a pop-up and your entire machine is encrypted. We are now seeing exfiltrationware, destructionware, extortionware. All of these really relate back to some form of ransom being demanded for either your system, your data, or something being held hostage. And it starts with, the idea that there are many ways to get into your system, right? There's many ways for a hacker to establish that first contact, especially now, right? Email is the old one that we were all worried about, but now people are coming in through the web. That's nothing new. But what about text? Using normal exploitation, using watering hole attacks. There's so many open doors for a hacker to get into your environment. Once they make that first contact, once they get a connection, then they're going to use those vulnerabilities I just talked about to really compromise your system. Once they compromise your system, then it's time to take control and elevate privileges so that they can really start to do elevated commands, really work on the native way that your operating system works, to take control of it, to be able to run the commands it's built to run, and for the most part look pretty legitimate as they're doing it, but be doing things that are at some point is going to allow them to really take control, and not only that, but evade security and the security measures you've put in place. So they're going to run a task kill against your antivirus. They're going to run a task kill probably days, weeks, months before on your backup processes. And let me be clear, and this is not a shot across the bow to any of the amazing backup technology that exists these days, but I think we need to stop thinking about backup as a security technology. Backup is a disaster recovery technology, and that is how hackers treat it, right? They are going to make sure that they disable this before they quote unquote put you in a disaster scenario, so that you really can't rely on it, because it's not built to protect itself or the system it is backing up. It's really just meant to take that snapshot and give you a point to recover if a disaster hits. So it is not in and of itself a security function. And then once they, sort of kill your antivirus, once they get rid of your backups and your snapshots, well, then they're going to start to do different type of things. They're going to drop files on your system, encryptors, ransom notes, system configuration changes. Then they're going to find some way to affect your data or your system, right? They'll exfil your data. They'll, encrypt your data. They'll corrupt your data. So, back in the day, we would get some encrypted data and we would go, okay, well, maybe I can even get a key. Maybe someone has developed a public key that I can, download if I Google hard enough and find somebody who's figured out, done sort of the algorithm to figure out the decryption. But now we're seeing total corruptionware, right? Where I just corrupt all your files. Maybe I keep a copy. Maybe I'm just trying to halt your business for a day. So, and then we see data exfiltration. This is, again, a really popular one these days where I will steal all of your data, I'll wipe it at source, and then force you to pay me to give it back to you, right? And then there's just pure extortion way. I somehow gather some either corporate secret or personal secret or something you do not want out there in, for others to see. And then I will extort you, asking the ransom for me not to release that data. And hopefully you're dealing with a hacker that does good customer service and they actually won't release the data to the wild. Then it comes down to that ransom, ransom demand that I just spoke to in the last slide, which is really, we're seeing these numbers go through the roof. And you'd be surprised at how much research real hacker teams, real hacker gangs will actually do on your organization before targeting you so that they understand the exact maximum value they can derive from your organization, because they don't want to ask for too much, because unfortunately, if you have to declare bankruptcy, that they're not really at an advantage there. They want to be paid. And so they're going to find, a ransom demand that fits your organization. And that's what they'll ask for. And typically it goes exponentially the more machines that they hit, or, in some cases, the criticality or the importance of the machine they hit depends on the ransom they will demand. So things like Revel and Maze that go after servers, those you're going to see some pretty high demands in terms of what they're asking for. So then we get into the whole customer service part of it, right? And I just sort of just alleviated to this, is it really is in the hacker's best interest to provide you the best customer service. Make sure you get everything you need to recover so that they can get paid, and you don't really ask too many questions. And this is also where we're seeing some cases, cyber insurance firms step in and help you with negotiation. They have some experience with dealing with these organizations, these hacker organizations, and so they can help you through this. But at the end of the day, you're still in this rut. You still had to pay out. And then comes to where that cost goes up exponentially in that recovery. Well, what if some of the systems that got hit, even when you do get your decryption key or you do get sent the data back, maybe they're just not recoverable? What about the PR? Look at this whole Colonial Pipeline situation. The reputation loss, the production loss, everything had a much larger impact than the actual ransom demands themselves. So, I saw an interview recently with one of the leaders of the Colonial Pipeline group, and he estimated that it'll be probably about middle of next year before they are considered to be at 100% recovery from the attack. So that'll be more than a full year of recovery and rebuilding some of those systems to get back up and running. So we can imagine that the cost of that when we're dealing in the oil industry is significantly higher than the 4.4 that was demanded. And so that's sort of the type of thing we saw with the attack on JBS, one of the biggest beef distributors in the US, right? Went after their critical security infrastructure, went after their critical infrastructure to take them down, cause them damage, and really put them in a situation where they had no choice but to pay that ransom. So how do we start to build against these things? How do we stop this trend? How do we stop this surge? If it's such a big problem and it doesn't seem to be going away, is there an answer? I get to ask that almost on a daily basis. Matt, you paint the picture for us of what's going on, but is there an answer? And I truly believe there is. And it's not that we're doing a lot of the wrong things. It just might be that we need to adjust a little bit, right? And one of the things I see quite often is, well, Matt, we would love to be up there with some of the big organizations in the world and some of the security postures that they've put in place, but we're a little bit resource light. I don't necessarily have people on my team that have a skill set that, make it really difficult for us to attack. Or maybe I haven't been able to acquire the tools for, to make up for the skills gap that I have. Well, what I always tell people is it shouldn't be a tools versus skills conversation, and you shouldn't constantly be trying to compensate one with the other. You should find a real comfortable spot for you to land in terms of the security solutions you buy, and either the employees and the skills you garner within your organization, or even the skills you're going to train upon in your organization. I once got told by one of my best friends, they said, Matt, you would make a horrible car salesman. And I said, well, why is that? They said, because if someone came in and you realized that they actually needed a bike, you would give them the one out of your garage. And that's truly how I feel about security too. Obviously, I work for an organization and we sell software, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But one of the conversations I always have with customers is what we do going to fit your team? Can we make your team better? Can I help that journey for your team to gain skills, to gain competency, and make your environment safer? I truly believe at SentinelOne that is what we do, but I think that's what every security director, every company out there should be doing when they evaluate solutions. Don't look at the shiniest box. Don't look at the, whoever has put out the best marketing campaign, or maybe even the most expensive solution out there because you assume it's got to be the best. No, really evaluate solutions and evaluate your skill set and make sure that they meet, because that is how the very first step to you building an excellent security posture. Now, this comes down to where we can help you in making those technology choices. And it comes down to, there was this traditional AV. It didn't require a lot of skill. It was very functional in what it did, but it fell short in really defending against some of those sophisticated attacks. Then comes out EDR. Well, a lot more difficult to use, required a certain skill set, but at least we knew that it captured most of the really advanced stuff. Then network control, cloud security, all these things had to come into the decor, especially last year as we were moving some of the workloads into the cloud, some of the people, becoming less office present. Well, and so we've converged all that. And now you're hearing this conversation of XDR, advanced EDR, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, it's what we have tried to do is make a solution that requires, maybe the same skill set that your traditional antivirus did, but that is far more effective, actually does real-time response, can actually look at behavior and figure out what, is going on and give you root cause analysis without forcing you to do, a tremendous amount of skill augmentation, etc., to get to that point. So looking at that behavior, how that ransom works, slide going back to that, understanding those behaviors so you can capture them before you get to the point where your back is against the wall and you're being held to pay. So the 5 most dangerous ransomware attacks we saw last year, playing against that tools versus skills thing, these were the 5 that had the biggest payouts, that were the most difficult to defend against. Well, one of the things is being ahead of the game, right? So we already have looked at all of these, and even before having to do anything to our solution to augment its, features or change some of the algorithms or the detection models, we were able to detect all of those out of the box, right? So us versus the scariest, and I do sort of poke at our marketing team because they haven't put out a video for Tycoon yet, though we do defend against it. But I'd be happy to even send you guys, anybody on the line today, some of these YouTube links, because it's worthwhile seeing how our solution can go against some of these things I'm talking about in terms of these advanced ransomware attacks. And it really does come down to trying to climb this pyramid of pain. This pyramid of pain was made very famous by Gartner and some of the other research organizations. And what it really alludes to is, as these ransomware attacks, as these advanced malware attacks have gotten more and more sophisticated, you're required to spend a lot more time at the top of this pyramid, where it's a lot more painful both in result and to defend against. You end up spending more time there. So the hash values, the IP addresses, all this reputation data, is it really worth what it used to be? Or do we really need to be starting to correlate telemetry, recognize patterns, and most importantly, be able to hunt against, some of these sophisticated attack strains? And if you've been to security events in the past or things like that, there's these capture the flag events. And what it really comes down to is, what are we trying to capture? What are the things we're really looking at when we try and defend against some of these more sophisticated ransomware attacks? Well, sure, people will tell you, you got to look for the IP addresses, the parent processes, the vulnerability it went after, what privileges were escalated, what kind of scheduled tasks it put in. What we're really looking at is we try and identify the IOCs, the affected assets, what were the targets, identify the tactic, techniques, and procedures used, identify the risk, so that we can get to a point where we're really identifying a path to immunization and not just constantly responding. And that means we will climb the pyramid at a much more successful and efficient way, because we're going to take the easy wins of those reputation battles. We're going to understand detected versus contained. We're going to be aware of where our security gaps are, what they're going to go after. We're going to know what data is out there, and we're going to know what happens to it on a daily basis, so we can understand when there's anomalies there. And we're going to be able to point to the root cause, and we're really going to get to a point where we're not just responding anymore. Like I said, we're really going to be building towards resiliency, where our environments are more and more immune to these types of attacks, so that we can finally see those numbers come down. And yes, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this back to our solution. So why are we so successful against ransomware attacks? Why do we have a ransomware warranty for some of our, medium-sized enterprise organizations that are maybe more vulnerable to these types of attacks? Well, the reason why we are so confident in what we do is because we've applied all the different layers, and we really build towards making a tool that will adapt to your skill set. So it starts with, taking some of the easy stuff that antivirus has always done: real-time file analysis, real-time object analysis, then adding on to it what the next-gen folks brought to the table, which is behavioral analysis. Not just taking for granted that a Word file is legitimate because I don't have, the signature or the reputation to it. Watching what that Word file does. But more importantly, where we stand apart is with our automated remediation. Automated and autonomous is what I should say. And that is the ability not just to do what antivirus has always done, which is kill and quarantine files and objects and processes, but really be able to isolate machines when they're in trouble. Be able to have an entire, what we call our storyline technology, which paints the whole picture and gives you the full understanding of what has been hit. But then most importantly, giving you that ability to remediate everything in real time, roll all the files back to their pre-attack state so that you have zero data effect, zero file effect, and your machine gets cleaned up. Our agent essentially acts just like an incident responder. It'll reverse all the system configuration changes, reverse all the privilege escalation, the registry modification, all those things we associated that I talked about and how ransomware works. It's going to reverse all that so that the machine is clean and healthy in real time as the attack is happening. And then to really stand at the top of that pyramid, I've got to talk about the threat hunting. But threat hunting is a skill that is very difficult to develop if you don't already have it. And you're not going to learn it overnight. So what we've done is we've just simplified it. We've almost gamified, if to use that word, threat hunting, where with a single click, I don't even need to have any experience as a threat hunter. I can use what we call our storyline ID, and it does the threat hunting for me. It'll essentially correlate the data, and with a couple pivots, be able to show you across your entire environment where you're still vulnerable, where you're still seeing the same similar type of activity, and then even give you some things like some remote shell ability and some real triage ability if you want to take the next steps. And this comes down to seconds. Speed is of the essence when you're dealing with these things. I talked about the response in real time. I talked about the response being autonomous, the agent doing the work for you, because too often have I seen that same adage repeated from, whether it's Gartner or one of the other EDR players out there, talk about the 60-10-60, 60 seconds to detect something, 10 minutes to have some sort of response, some sort of idea of what the root cause is, and then up to 60 minutes to truly respond and remediate what's going on. That is far too long. There is no person in the world that will give me their laptop for 60 minutes, because they will get it back and they will never be able to recover. So it has to be done in seconds, and we've really taken that, and everything happens in real time. You don't need to take my word for it. As this, has continued to evolve, MITRE has done a great job. MITRE, by the way, is not like Gartner. They're not like Forrester. They're not like some of these other third-party evaluators. They are data scientists. They're threat scientists, when they evaluate products, they actually take scientific methodology. And so they did that, we call it the 2020, 2021 evaluation. And they took the Carbonac Fin 7 attack and played it against all of the EDR solutions that were willing to participate. Only one solution got a perfect score. That was us. Only one solution scored above 90% in terms of correlating the data that came in, not just detecting it, but providing real correlation in real time. We were the only ones to get 90% in that. So not only do we detect everything, but we give you immediate correlation and root cause analysis out of the box. Very important when we're looking at that total pattern. The other piece is hackers will never give you a second chance. They don't go, oh, well, you didn't block us today. We'll come back tomorrow and see if you try again. No, you have to get them the first time, and you have to get them at their initial stages. And that was one of the key things that MITRE looked at, was delays, and did you have to configuration change? Did you have to add, a DAT file update or a reputation update to detect some parts of what they did? And we were one of the only ones that had to make 0 configuration changes to perform the way we did. And of course, getting the perfect score paired with that 0 configuration changes is pretty telling, especially when we see some of the big players there that had to make significant configuration changes just to get the scores they did, and still didn't perform as well as us. So with that, I thank you for the 30 minutes plus a little bit here that you've chosen to spend with me today. If there is any questions, I'll stick around to ask them, and really appreciate everybody's time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. It was awesome. I don't have any questions in the chat, but what I would like to ask, you had one slide with some YouTube links to share out. If you want to go ahead and send those to me, I'll go ahead and put them in our YouTube information when this recording is placed there, so people have access to it. But otherwise, yeah, I don't see anything just yet. So yeah, I think we will go ahead and call this a day. Matthew, again, thank you so much. That was incredibly informative, and look forward to working with you further.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. Thank you.